What happens when a woman who built her marriage on half-truths tries to out-talk her husband after he discovers everything? How does a single folder of evidence destroy every lie she's told and leave her fighting to keep even her name? My name is Selene Myles. I'm 35, married, and I used to think lying was just another form of protecting peace. I told myself everyone hides something, especially in marriage. My husband, Daniel, never suspected much. He trusted me completely, which made it easy to tell small stories that turned into bigger ones. At first, it was harmless. A late night at the clinic, a forgotten call, a half-truth about a lunch break. But then there was Adrian, a client with an easy smile who made everything feel lighter. He noticed when I changed my hair, when I wore a new color, when I looked tired. Daniel never did. I told myself it wasn't cheating if it stayed in words. I needed the attention, not the affair. I convinced myself I was starved for validation, not affection. Every lie came wrapped in reason. I worked too hard, Daniel was distant, marriage was dull. It was easy to believe I deserved a secret, something that was mine alone. Daniel was quiet, careful, too patient for his own good. I mistook that patience for weakness. When he'd ask why I was late, I'd sigh and say I was working. He'd nod. No argument, no drama. I thought his calm made me clever. Now I see it was something else. He was waiting. I thought I could talk my way out of anything. I thought denial could cover the truth if I said it gently enough. But the night he placed my phone on the table, unlocked and silent, I saw everything unravel in his eyes before he even spoke. That was the beginning of the end, though I didn't understand it then. I still believed I could lie faster than he could prove. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible stories. It started like most things I shouldn't have done, with a simple compliment. Adrian was a new client at the dental clinic, the kind that smiled too easily, who lingered after appointments just long enough to make small talk sound personal. He was charming, and I was bored. It didn't feel like anything dangerous. When he asked if I wanted to grab coffee sometime, I laughed and said it wasn't professional. He said, "Then we'll pretend it's not coffee." That line stayed in my head longer than it should have. At home, Daniel was sitting at the kitchen table grading papers. He asked if I had a good day, and I said it was fine. He didn't look up, just nodded the way he always did. That quiet used to comfort me. Now it irritated me. I wanted him to look up, to notice me, to ask for details. When he didn't, I picked a fight about something stupid. How he never plans dates anymore. How I do everything for the house. He said he thought I liked things organized my way. That made me angrier, though I couldn't explain why. The next day at work, I found myself hoping Adrian would stop by. He did. He made a joke about how serious I looked behind the desk, and I laughed too loudly. My coworker, Emily, gave me a look, but didn't say anything. When Adrian left, I caught my reflection in the glass door and saw how much I was smiling. It scared me a little, but it also felt good. That evening, I told Daniel I had to stay late for patient records. He didn't question it. He just said he'd make dinner. I met Adrian instead. We didn't touch, just talked and drank coffee until it was dark outside. He asked if my husband minded me working late. I said he never asked questions. Adrian smiled like he already knew the answer. When I got home, Daniel was on the couch with Ella asleep beside him. He'd waited up for me, the TV still on, plates washed, the house calm. He asked if I'd eaten. I said yes. He asked if work went okay. I said it did. Then he said something I wasn't ready for. "You've been different lately." I laughed it off. I said I was just tired, that the clinic was short-staffed. He nodded again. That nod always made me feel both safe and invisible. I told myself he was overthinking, that if I had something real to hide, I'd be nervous. But I wasn't. I was in control. A few days later, he brought me lunch at work without warning. I wasn't there. I'd gone out with Adrian, just a quick break that lasted an hour. When I came back, Emily said, "Your husband stopped by. He's sweet." My stomach twisted, but I forced a smile. I told myself it wasn't guilt, just surprise. That night, Daniel didn't mention the visit. He just said he'd seen how busy the office was and that he didn't want to interrupt me. His voice was soft, polite. I told him he didn't need to check up on me like I was a child. He said, "I wasn't checking. I was just missing you." I turned away before my face could give anything away. I told Lara about it that weekend over drinks. She laughed, said men always get suspicious when they feel their control slipping. She told me to stop feeling guilty for wanting attention. "You're not doing anything wrong," she said. "You're just reminding yourself you're alive." That became my new justification. I was alive, not unfaithful. I was reconnecting with myself, not betraying anyone. I repeated those lines until they felt like truth. But one night, as I was folding laundry, Daniel walked in quietly and placed my phone on the bed. The screen was unlocked, the last text from Adrian still visible. "Can't wait to see you again." I froze. He said, "I think you forgot to delete one." His voice wasn't angry. It was calm. Too calm. I stammered that it was nothing, that Adrian was just a patient, that I'd been helping him with a dental insurance claim. Daniel just looked at me and said, "We'll talk later." Then he left the room. I sat there staring at the phone until the screen went black. My heart raced, but not from fear, from annoyance. How dare he snoop through my phone? That's what I told myself instead of facing what I'd done. That night, I deleted every message, changed Adrian's name in my contacts to clinic supplier, and promised myself it wouldn't happen again. I even convinced myself it had never gone too far. After all, we hadn't crossed any real line. Not yet. But something in Daniel's silence had changed. He wasn't cold, just distant in a way that made me uneasy. Like he was watching instead of reacting. Like he was waiting for me to dig my own hole deeper. And I did. After that night, Daniel stopped asking questions. He just observed. He'd glance at my phone when it buzzed, but he never said a word. He'd check the time when I came home late, but he'd smile and ask if I wanted tea. It was worse than anger. It was indifference. I told Lara he was becoming obsessive, that he didn't trust me anymore. She said men always get paranoid once they realize they're boring. I repeated that story to my co-workers too, turning Daniel into the controlling husband who didn't like me having friends. Everyone nodded sympathetically. It felt good having people on my side, even if it was built on lies. Daniel, meanwhile, seemed calmer. Too calm. He stopped checking my phone, stopped asking who I was talking to. Instead, he started making small changes, updating the budget, switching our accounts to personal management mode, talking about how organization prevents conflict. I told myself he was trying to prove he was still in charge. At the clinic, things were getting complicated. Adrian was getting bolder. He'd brush my arm when no one was looking or whisper jokes when I walked past. Emily noticed once and gave me a sharp look. I told her he was just a friend. She didn't believe me. That Friday, Daniel called while I was on my lunch break. I didn't answer. When I got home, he asked if I'd seen his missed call. I said I was busy. He nodded. Then he said, "I drove past the clinic today. You weren't there." I froze for half a second before saying I'd gone out to get food. He said, "I know. I saw." There was something about how he said it. No accusation, no tone, just fact, that made my stomach drop. I told him he was making me feel like a criminal. He said, "If you're innocent, you shouldn't feel that way." That night, I went out with Lara. I needed to vent. I told her Daniel had been tracking me. She told me to stand my ground. "If you admit guilt, he'll use it forever," she said. I believed her. We posted pictures of our drinks online, laughing. Later, I noticed Daniel had liked the post. No comment, no message, just a like. It didn't seem like much, but it felt like a warning. The next week, he started writing things down, literally. I saw a notebook open on his desk, neat columns of dates, times, and notes like Selene late from work, 8:40 p.m., or clinic call log discrepancy. When I confronted him, he said it was for tracking expenses. I didn't believe him, but I didn't push it. I told myself I wasn't scared. I was annoyed. I was tired of being watched, tired of defending myself for something that wasn't even real. Adrian, meanwhile, was pulling away. He said he didn't like getting caught up in marriage drama. I told him there was no drama, that Daniel was just overthinking. He said maybe I should come clean before it got worse. I told him not to worry, that I could handle it. The following weekend, Daniel's mother, Paula, invited us for dinner. She watched me closely the whole night. When Daniel went to help in the kitchen, she leaned across the table and said softly, "You're breaking him, Selene. I hope you know that." I smiled and said she was mistaken. She said, "Mothers aren't mistaken about these things." On the drive home, I told Daniel what she said. I expected him to defend me. Instead, he said, "She's worried because she can tell something's off. She's not wrong." I exploded. I accused him of turning his family against me, of feeding them lies, of letting them think I was unfaithful. He said he hadn't told anyone anything. "They just see what I see," he said quietly. That silence in the car felt endless. The next week, he stopped wearing his wedding ring. I noticed immediately. When I asked about it, he said it kept snagging on papers at school. I said that was ridiculous. He smiled and said, "Maybe." Something in that small, unbothered maybe terrified me. At work, Adrian began avoiding me entirely. He came in for one last appointment, barely looked at me, and said he was transferring his file to another clinic. I wanted to ask why, but I already knew. Daniel had done something. When I got home, I asked if he'd spoken to Adrian. He didn't deny it. He said, "I wanted to know what kind of person you'd risk our family for." I called him cruel. He said, "Truth isn't cruel, Selene. It's just quiet." That night I couldn't eat. I couldn't even sit near him. I lay awake listening to the faint scratching of his pen as he wrote in that notebook again. A few days later, we were invited to a neighbor's barbecue. I wanted to cancel, but Daniel insisted we go. Everyone was there. Families, laughter, music. I tried to act normal. When someone asked if Daniel ever got jealous of my social life, I laughed and said he was too busy grading homework to care. Everyone laughed. Daniel smiled, holding his drink, and said, "Not anymore." The laughter stopped. He said it so evenly, so softly, that it almost didn't sound like a warning until the silence that followed. I smiled tightly, pretending it was just a joke, but my heart was pounding. On the drive home, he didn't say a word. When we pulled into the driveway, he turned off the engine and said, "You should rest. Tomorrow's going to be a long day." I asked what that meant. He said, "You'll see." I watched him walk inside, calm as ever, and for the first time I realized the man I thought I could manipulate wasn't confused or heartbroken. He was preparing, and I was the only one still pretending this wasn't already falling apart. The next morning, Daniel left early, long before I got up. I found a note on the counter saying he'd taken Ella to school and would be back late. No warmth, no small talk, just logistics. I stared at that piece of paper, trying to convince myself it didn't mean anything. But deep down, I knew something was shifting for good. At work, everything felt heavier. I could barely focus on the patients or the paperwork. Adrian hadn't been in for a week, and I'd stopped hearing from him entirely. I told myself it was fine, that it wasn't serious anyway, but the silence stung. I caught myself checking my phone constantly, waiting for a message that would never come. Emily noticed. During lunch, she said, "You look like someone who's about to get caught." I laughed, pretending she was joking. She didn't smile. "You should fix whatever it is," she said quietly, "before it fixes you." That sentence stuck with me all day. When I got home, Daniel was in the living room, typing on his laptop. He didn't look up. I asked how his day was. He said fine. I asked if he'd eaten. He said yes. I waited for him to ask about my day, but he didn't. I finally said, "You're really not going to talk to me?" He said, "I'm listening. You just don't have anything new to say." I snapped, accusing him of trying to punish me with silence. He said, "You've mistaken my silence for surrender." Then he closed the laptop and left the room. That night, I went through his desk drawers. I don't even know what I was looking for, proof that he was bluffing, maybe. I found folders labeled finances, school, and one labeled house. Inside the house folder were printed copies of utility bills and bank transfers, only his name listed. He'd already changed ownership on half our accounts. I felt dizzy. The next morning, I called Lara. I told her Daniel was planning something, that he was cutting me out financially. She said I was being paranoid, that he'd never actually leave me. "Men like him don't walk away," she said. "They sulk, then forgive." I wanted to believe that. That afternoon, Daniel texted me. "Dinner tonight. Let's talk." 7 p.m. at Stella's. I spent an hour deciding what to wear. I told myself this was it. The night he'd finally open up. The night I could talk my way back to control. When I got there, the waiter led me to a table in the back. Daniel wasn't there. A man in a gray suit was waiting instead. He stood up, introduced himself as Mr. Holden, and said he was Daniel's attorney. I felt my throat tighten. He handed me a folder. "Mr. Myles asked me to give you these," he said politely. Inside were printed emails, call logs, and photos. Photos of me with Adrian. Nothing inappropriate, just close enough to tell the truth without saying it. I said it was all a misunderstanding. Mr. Holden said he wasn't here to argue, only to deliver documents. Then he said, "Mr. Myles asked that I inform you he'll be filing for legal separation." I asked where Daniel was. He said, "Preparing the paperwork." I left the restaurant before dessert even arrived. When I got home, Daniel was sitting at the table, calm as ever. I threw the folder at him and said he had no right to humiliate me like that. He said, "You've already done that yourself." I shouted that he was ruining our family over a rumor. He said, "Rumors need words. I have pictures." I told him Adrian meant nothing. He said, "Then why did you delete everything?" I didn't answer. He pushed the folder toward me again. "Sign it," he said. "We can do this quietly." I refused. I told him he was paranoid, that this was his way of getting control after years of being ignored. He looked tired then, just tired, not angry. "You still don't understand," he said. "I'm not trying to win. I'm just done losing." He stood, gathered his laptop, and went upstairs. I stayed there for a long time, staring at the folder. It wasn't fair, I thought. I'd only wanted a little freedom, a little excitement. He was making it sound like I'd destroyed everything. When Lara came over the next day, I told her everything. She said Daniel was bluffing, that he was too calm to actually go through with it. "He's just scaring you," she said. "Ignore him for a few days. He'll break." But Daniel didn't break. He didn't yell, didn't argue. He started sleeping in the guest room. He took Ella to school every morning without saying a word to me. He even stopped drinking coffee at home, started going to a cafe instead. When I asked why, he said, "It's easier to think somewhere quiet." I said the house was quiet. He said, "That's the problem. It's not peaceful. It's empty." Later that week, I went to the clinic early and tried to call Adrian. He didn't pick up. I tried again during lunch. This time he answered, but his tone was sharp. He said Daniel had come to see him. My chest went cold. "He showed me messages," Adrian said. "Screenshots, times, even call logs. I'm not getting dragged into this, Selene." I told him he didn't need to worry, that I'd handle it. He said, "You already handled it. Badly." Then he hung up. That afternoon, I couldn't stop shaking. Every patient I checked in sounded like noise. Emily whispered that I looked sick. Maybe I did. When I got home that night, Daniel was in the living room again. He looked up from his notebook and said, "Adrian stopped by." I said he was lying. He said, "You should check your clinic security footage before you deny anything else." My heart dropped. I told him he was insane. He said, "No, just thorough." Then he walked upstairs, leaving me standing there, the silence pressing against me like a wall. I didn't sleep that night. I kept replaying his words, thorough, like a threat I couldn't ignore. By morning, I decided to get ahead of it. If I acted calm, if I controlled the story, I could still win. I told myself Daniel was bluffing. I told myself he wouldn't dare make anything public. At the clinic, I tried to check the security system, but the access password had been changed. My boss said the IT team had reset it after a privacy complaint. I knew what that meant. My stomach twisted. At lunch, I called Daniel. He didn't answer. I called again. Still nothing. Finally, I sent a message. "We need to talk. Please." No reply. That afternoon, Laura met me at a coffee shop. I told her I thought Daniel had gone to HR, or even the clinic board. She looked at me like I was overreacting. "He's bluffing," she said again. "Men like that don't want a scene. He's too private to expose you." I wanted to believe her, but I remembered the photos, the printed emails, the lawyer's tone. Daniel didn't need a scene. He had strategy. When I got home, the house felt different, colder. There was a thick envelope on the kitchen counter with my name written neatly on it. Inside were legal documents, a notice of separation, preliminary custody arrangements, and a list of financial transfers already processed. I dropped the papers and whispered, "No." Daniel came downstairs holding Ella's backpack. "We're staying with my mother for a few days," he said. I said he couldn't take her. He said, "I'm not taking her. I'm protecting her." I said he was destroying her life. He said, "You did that the day you started lying to her father." I tried to grab the papers. He didn't stop me. He just watched as I tore them in half and threw them in the trash. "It doesn't matter," he said. "I already filed copies." Then he walked out, closing the door quietly behind him. That sound, the click of the door, soft but final, echoed in my head for hours. Later that night, I found myself staring at the trash bin, at the shredded pages that meant my life was unraveling piece by piece. I tried calling him again. No answer. I texted him, "You're making a mistake." A few minutes later, he replied, "No, I'm correcting one." The next day, Paula called. Her voice was sharp. She said she knew about everything, that Daniel had shown her proof. I tried to deny it, said it wasn't what it looked like. She said, "You've said that before, haven't you?" and hung up. When I called Laura, she sounded nervous. She said, "Maybe it's time to admit something, just a little. You don't want this going to court." I said it wouldn't. She said, "Selene, he's already filed. You can't out-talk a lawyer." That evening, I went to the cafe Daniel liked. He was there, reading quietly. I sat down across from him and whispered, "We can fix this. We can go to counseling." He said, "Counseling doesn't erase evidence." I said, "You still love me." He looked up, calm, composed, and said, "I love the woman I thought you were. She doesn't exist anymore." I felt tears coming, but I couldn't cry. I wasn't ready to let him see me weak. I told him he was cruel, that he was embarrassing me. He said, "No, Selene. You embarrassed yourself. I just stopped covering for you." He finished his coffee, stood up, and walked away. I stayed there for a long time, staring at the half-empty cup he left behind, the small ring of coffee at the bottom of the mug, like a circle I couldn't escape. When I went home that night, Ella's room was empty except for a few toys. The closet doors were open, half her clothes missing. The silence in that house was unbearable, thicker than guilt, colder than grief. On the dining table was a smaller envelope. Inside was a single sheet of paper, Custody hearing scheduled. Please confirm attendance. Below that, Daniel had written one line in his tidy handwriting. You can keep the lies. I'm keeping the truth. My hands shook so badly I could barely hold the paper. I had spent months thinking I was clever, thinking denial would protect me. But Daniel had built his revenge like a quiet wall, document by document, truth by truth, and by the time I noticed, it was already too high to climb over. The next morning, I drove to my mother-in-law's house, desperate to see Ella. Paula met me at the door. She said, "You can see her when the court says you can." Then she closed the door. I stood there on the porch, staring at my reflection in the glass, realizing for the first time that Daniel's silence had never been weakness. It had been warning, and I'd ignored every word of it. The morning of the hearing, I dressed carefully. I wanted to look calm, sympathetic, misunderstood, but not guilty. I chose a beige dress, simple makeup, and flat shoes. I told myself I still had a chance. Daniel was too reasonable to destroy me completely. He loved Ella too much to take her away from me. That was my hope. That was the lie I needed to survive the drive to the courthouse. When I arrived, Daniel was already there. Of course he was. Sitting straight beside his lawyer, everything neat, papers stacked, pen aligned, calm expression fixed. He nodded when I entered but didn't smile. That small gesture of recognition hurt more than any insult. He wasn't angry anymore. He was finished. The mediator began the session with polite introductions. We are here to discuss custody and separation terms for the Myles family. Her tone was even, rehearsed, professional. I tried to meet Daniel's eyes, but he didn't look at me once. His lawyer spoke first, presenting what he called documented proof of dishonesty and unfit conduct. The phrase made my stomach turn. He slid a folder across the table toward me. I didn't want to open it, but the mediator nodded, so I did. Inside were printed screenshots, receipts, timestamps, every text I thought I'd deleted, every call I thought he'd never notice. There was even a copy of my clinic's security log showing me leaving with Adrian after hours. I tried to keep my face neutral, but I could feel my pulse in my throat. I said it was all exaggerated, taken out of context. Daniel said nothing. His lawyer said calmly, "We'll let the court decide that." The mediator asked me to respond. I said I'd made mistakes, but that it was emotional, not physical. I said I'd been lonely, that Daniel had grown distant, that I hadn't felt like myself. I even said I was sorry. Daniel finally spoke. "She's always sorry," he said quietly, "but only after she's caught." The mediator asked him to stay civil. He nodded, still calm, still polite. Then his lawyer began to list changes Daniel had already made: financial accounts secured, house title transferred, child's school documentation updated, and temporary custody arrangements in place. Everything legal, everything airtight. I said he was trying to destroy me. He said, "I'm protecting what's left." I tried to speak again, to argue, but the mediator held up a hand. "Mrs. Myles," she said, "you will have time to present your statement. For now, please listen." It was unbearable. Sitting there while Daniel's lawyer painted me as someone untrustworthy, unstable, unfit. The worst part was that I couldn't even deny most of it. Every word they said had a receipt behind it. When the mediator asked if Daniel wanted to make a personal statement, he said, "I just want peace for my daughter, that's all." His voice was steady, but his eyes flickered when he said, "Peace." For a moment I saw the exhaustion underneath, the months of waiting, pretending, recording, surviving. He wasn't acting. He was done. The mediator asked me what I wanted. I said I wanted my family back. I said Daniel was overreacting, that he'd built a story out of fear. He said quietly, "No, Selene, you built it. I just stopped pretending it wasn't real." I could feel everyone watching me, the lawyer, the mediator, even the assistant in the corner taking notes. I hated them for their silence, for how calm they looked while my life collapsed one document at a time. The mediator called for a short break. I went to the restroom and stared at myself in the mirror. My hands were shaking. I wanted to cry, but the tears wouldn't come. I whispered, "You can fix this. You can talk your way through it." But my voice didn't sound convincing anymore. When I returned, the final section was waiting, property division. The lawyer explained how Daniel would keep the house in primary custody, with visitation depending on my compliance with behavioral conditions. It sounded like punishment disguised as paperwork. I said it wasn't fair. The lawyer said, "Fairness isn't the question here, Mrs. Myles. Stability is." Daniel signed his papers without hesitation. When it was my turn, my hand trembled so badly the pen nearly slipped. The mediator gently said, "Take your time." I looked up at Daniel one last time and whispered, "You still love me." He met my eyes, not angry, just distant. "I did," he said, "but love doesn't mean trust." When the session ended, he stood, thanked the mediator, and left. I stayed sitting, staring at the empty chair where he'd been. The assistant collected the folders, avoiding my gaze. As I walked to the parking lot, Daniel was already pulling away in his car, Ella's booster seat visible in the back. He didn't look at me, not once. That night, I sat alone in the house and read the papers again. Every page was a mirror showing me the person I'd become. Calm, manipulative, certain she'd never be caught. And now, every lie was filed, stamped, and legal. I poured myself a glass of water, but my hands were shaking too much to hold it steady. I realized that he hadn't destroyed me. I had done it piece by piece. Every time I said, "It's not what it looks like." I had made my entire life about controlling the story. Now, the story was controlling me. A week later, the official decision came through. The court approved Daniel's custody request. Ella would live with him full-time. I'd get supervised visits twice a month, pending review. The email from the court clerk was so matter-of-fact it almost felt unreal. Like my family had been reduced to a formality. I stared at the message until the words blurred. Then I opened the attachments. There it was, in legal language that sounded colder than anything Daniel had ever said. Primary custody granted to Mr. Daniel Myles. Secondary visitation, pending compliance. I closed my laptop and sat in silence. That evening, I drove to Daniel's new apartment. He opened the door halfway, blocking my view of Ella inside. I asked if I could talk. He said, "Ella's having dinner." I said it would only take a minute. He stepped outside, closing the door behind him. I said I couldn't believe he was really going through with it. He said, "You believed everything else you told yourself. Why not this?" I told him he was teaching Ella to hate me. He said, "No, I'm teaching her to tell the truth, even when it hurts." I begged him to forgive me. I told him it had meant nothing, that I was lonely, that I made mistakes. He said, "You didn't make mistakes. You made choices." When I started to cry, he said softly, "You used to cry to win. It doesn't work anymore." Then he went back inside and locked the door. I stood there for a long time, staring at the closed door, listening to faint laughter from inside. Ella's laughter, bright and unbothered. It used to fill our house. Now it sounded like it belonged somewhere else. A few days later, I received another email, this one from the clinic. "Following recent ethical concerns," it read, "we are terminating your employment effective immediately." I called the office in a panic, but the manager said the board had already reviewed everything. Adrian had confessed to the unprofessional relationship, and my position was no longer tenable. I hung up and sat there in my car, staring at the steering wheel. I wanted to blame Daniel, but deep down I knew he hadn't done anything outside the law. He didn't have to. He had simply let the truth do the work. That night, I packed my things. The house no longer felt like mine anyway. Every drawer I opened, every photograph I touched, carried his quiet handwriting, the life he'd built and I'd dismantled. I kept only what I needed: some clothes, a few books, Ella's old drawing of the three of us holding hands. The picture made me cry harder than anything else had. I left the key on the kitchen counter next to a folded note that said, "I'm sorry." For real this time. I didn't expect him to read it. The next morning, I moved into a small apartment downtown. It smelled like paint and emptiness. I sat on the floor surrounded by boxes, the silence pressing against me. For the first time, I had no one to convince, no one to lie to, no one to perform for. Just the echo of my own voice asking, why did I do it? I told myself I'd been lonely, but that wasn't the truth. I'd been selfish. I'd needed to feel powerful. And Daniel, calm, steady, unshakable Daniel, had reminded me every day that I wasn't. So I tried to break him instead. But he didn't break. He just waited. And when he struck back, he didn't yell, didn't slam doors, didn't threaten. He filed, he documented, he dismantled me with patience. A week later, I saw him at Ella's school. I was there early for my scheduled visit. He was walking her to the car, holding her hand, smiling as she told him something. When he noticed me, he stopped a few feet away. "Hi," I said. My voice sounded small. He nodded. "You're early." I said I wanted to make the most of my time. He said, "That's good." Ella ran to hug me. I held her tight, breathing in her hair, trying not to cry. Daniel watched, expression unreadable. When it was time for her to go back to him, she kissed my cheek and said, "Daddy says you're learning to be better." I nodded, unable to speak. As they drove away, I stood there in the parking lot, watching the taillights disappear. I didn't move for a long time. That evening, a final envelope arrived at my apartment. Inside was the last piece of paperwork, confirmation of the property transfer and custody order. I sat on the couch, holding it like it might burn me. At the bottom of the letter was a line from Daniel's lawyer. "This concludes all pending matters." I laughed softly, though it sounded more like a sob. All pending matters. My marriage, my home, my reputation. All finalized, sealed, and complete. I thought about calling Daniel again, just to hear his voice. But I didn't. He had given me every answer already, and I'd ignored them all. The next morning, I opened the window of my new apartment. The air was cold and still. Somewhere, a child was laughing outside, a sound that reminded me of Ella. I leaned against the windowsill and whispered, "He didn't destroy me. I did." And for the first time, I didn't try to lie about it. Don't forget to hit like, subscribe, and turn on the bell so you don't miss the next story. Write in the comments from which city you are watching.